Hey folks, my name is Adam and I like to make tiny nerdy things, and sometimes when I'm stressed out, I like to relax with a little Lego. Unfortunately, I don't have any on hand, so I had to make my own. Of course, I don't want to tread on the Lego group's toes, so I'm going to make mine a little bigger than usual. And to save on clay, I'm going to build the core out of aluminum foil, then cover it in a thin layer of clay. Then I'll bake that till I've got a rock solid center. A couple lengths of wire on the sides will function as the arm bones, and a couple wires in the bottom will be his leg bones. Then I can mount him on a block and get to work on building up the fleshy bits. Lego Man Anatomy leans towards a pretty bulky, stocky build, but I want this to be as accurate as possible to a normal Lego Man minifig. Really, I want you to look at this when it's finished and think, oh, Adam's just playing with everyday, run-of-the-mill Legos? How totally normal. He must be a very sane and very reasonable person. To that end, I'm going to make sure his legs are roughly as thick as his body and roughly the same length. Then I'll smooth everything out and start adding the totally normal details like kneecaps and ankles. Of course, in keeping with that stocky leg anatomy, I want to make sure that I smooth these in so they're just barely noticeable. Again, I don't want this to look weird. I'm just trying to make it a slightly larger version of a Lego man, but with a little more detail that's usually obscured on the smaller figures. For instance, most Lego men are wearing a onesie that covers their feet, but if you catch them without their leggings, you'll find that they have a single large toe. Obviously, with that much toe in the game, you're going to have an awful lot of toe wrinkle around the area as well. Of course, with a stocky, chubby leg like that, you'd expect a lot of leg wrinkles too. Now, Lego men aren't monsters after all, so there's no claws here, just a single big toenail. Of course, a toenail that big is going to be hard to take care of, so I expect it to be pretty banged up. I mean, maybe that's why they're always covering them up. I'll bulk out his belly a bit by giving him a nice, natural, healthy paunch, then add some less than muscular pecs. Now, there's a lot of body types in the Lego world, so I wanted to get an average body type, which is probably pretty close to a dad bod. Oh, and I gave him a belly button too, which I guess leads to a lot of questions I'm unwilling to answer. Finally, I'll add a little squishy coin of clay and blend that into his chest so that I have a neck upon which to attach his head. Speaking of which, same as with the body, I'll start by making myself an aluminum foil skull, then rolling myself an oversized piece of clay sushi before cutting the edges off and blending it all in. Now, I noticed there was a decent amount of air trapped between the clay and the foil, and if I don't get it out, then it will expand in the oven, causing pops and cracks in the clay. So I've got a hole in the top of the head to give the hot air somewhere to escape to, then I can attach the head to the neck, blend it in, and then because this is a Lego man, I'll give him my apple. Finally, I realized that if I'm going to give him a belly button, then I really ought to give him some nipples. You know, for continuity. These are going to get covered up by a shirt later anyways, but this way you know they're there and we can all suffer together. Using my ball stylus, I'll poke a couple of eye sockets into appropriately eye sockety areas, then carve a starting line for his mouth. I've pre-baked a couple eyeballs of clay which get fitted into his face, then I can get to work on bulking out the facial details. As I mentioned before, a lot of the detail gets lost at the usual scale with Legos, which is why I wanted to make this guy a little bit bigger. It's also why you can't really see any of the wrinkles and skin textures at that scale, so I'm gonna really spend some extra time highlighting them here. With the face finished, I baked everything to lock it in place so I can get to work adding his arms. Now the arms themselves are pretty uninteresting as they're just clay sausages that get stuck onto the bone and bent into the correct angle. On the other hand, his hands need a bit of attention. Basically, the Lego man hand is less a hand and more a claw with two thumbs. And like any good double-thumbed claw hand, it's gonna need a healthy nail bed, a good amount of wrinkles on top of the knuckles, some skin folds inside the thumb palms, and of course, a set of beautifully manicured thumbnails. Finally, to add the fingerprint texture to the thumbs, I'm gonna use my fingerprints. At this scale, it's pretty much spot on, though it does mean that if this Lego man ever comes to life and commits a crime, there's a very real chance that I'll get framed for it. Otherwise, all that's left to do is add the little connector on top of his head, and the sculpting is all but finished, which means it's time to move on to the painting, which means it's time to prime him white. Now, in sticking with that true to the original design that I'm going for, I want to end with the jaundice yellow skin tone so often associated with minifigs. However, I still want it to have a nice fleshy look, so I'm going to start by covering it with a pinkish skin tone as a base coat. I'll follow that up by applying a healthy coat of very thin yellow over top, then sponging it away. This will help to remove the brush strokes, prevents the yellow from building up in the flat surfaces, but allows it to run into the cracks and crevices. Plus, it's kinda like I'm applying makeup, and those makeup tutorials get mad views. I'll slowly work my way through a series of similar, but not quite the same shades of yellow to help give my Lego man's skin a bit of depth, all the while working to tone that yellow down to a slightly fleshier look. Then I'll come back through and add some darker highlights to all the wrinkles, continuing to sponge away any excess. The goal here is to give it a nearly imperceptible shading. Or at least in hindsight that's the goal, since it makes it sound like what you're seeing is intentional, and not just me making it up as I go along. With skin tones finished and looking not the least bit horrifying, I can begin painting the details, starting with the sextet of fingernails and toenails. I ended up adding a bit more grime to his toenails later on, which I kind of regret since I'm actually really happy with how they turned out here. I suppose I could go back and repaint them at any time, but knowing myself, I'm not gonna. I'll give his mouth an internal coat of black, then do the same though externally to his eyeballs before touching up his lips with a little lip gloss. Then it's time to cover up his shame. To cut down on painting time later, I'm going to make his clothes out of colored Cosclay, starting with blue for his blue jeans. Of course, if I want him to have blue jeans, I'm going to need some good jean texture. Fortunately, I've got this pile of blackout fabric, which is offcuts from my Glamour Shot backdrops, and has a pretty solid looking blue jean texture. I'll cut a strip of it out and lay a flat sheet of blue clay on top of it so that I can run them both through my pasta machine at the same time, leaving me with a pretty convincing fabric texture. Then I can cut it into strips and build myself a pair of jeans. It's kinda like making jean shorts, but in reverse, and also nothing like that. Basically, I'll just cut out little strips and stick it onto my Lego man until I've got all the leg parts covered that I want covered. While the overall goal is for this to be indistinguishable from a normal minifig, I'm not going to be covering up his feet, instead opting for that shoeless look. I considered making him some sandals, but I couldn't decide on what style to go with. I suppose a pair of Birkenstocks would probably look pretty smart, but maybe I'll do that next time. At this point, I've got his jeans assembled, and I can start adding the wrinkles and folds by way of little wormy dealies attached strategically where the wrinkles would be. For reference, I just looked up chubby babies wearing jeans and copied where the wrinkles and folds sit. A quick dab with fabric will redo my textures, and I can get to work adding the trouser details. Now, in previous videos, I've had some people comment on how I call them pants in one sentence and trousers in the next, and there's a very good reason for that. In Canada, pants are pants, but in the UK, pants are underwear, and you can quickly find yourself in awkward silence when you tell your in-laws that your pants are dirty. So while I will slip back and forth every once in a while, I do tend to default to calling everything trousers just to avoid any unnecessary confusion. Diatribe aside though, my trousers are done and I can get to work on my shirt, or as it's called in the UK, a jolly good T-bib. This goes through pretty much the exact same process of cutting strips and layering them up until my Lego man's chubby belly is covered, except this time I'm not going to bother with any textures. Now, for those of you wondering, yes, you could absolutely see his nipples through his shirt. I ended up adding a bit of extra clay there to cover them up because I couldn't stop laughing. Additionally, I ended up missing a tiny bit of clay at the bottom, so it looks like he's just a bit too fat for his shirt and his belly is hanging out, and I think that is the textbook definition of a happy accident. Otherwise, I'll do the exact same thing I did with the pants, adding little wormy dealies all over the place to simulate the folds in his shirt. There's not much detail to add up top, but I'll make sure to give his collar as well as his cuffs a bit of attention, then it's time to add a bit more color. Because I've used the colored clay, I'm really only increasing the vibrancy and adding some shading. I'll start by repainting the entire surface with a thinned out red, then touching up all the edges with a lighter shade. I'll do the exact same thing for the jeans, adding a nicer blue base coat to cover the blue of the clay, then adding lots of light blue highlights along all the areas that the jeans would fray. For me, the real benefit of painting the colored clay is that I can work a lot faster and not worry about missing any spots. If I do end up missing a bit of the blue, well, the clay is already blue, so who's really gonna notice? Otherwise, with everything else painted and sculpted, I can finally add a couple drops of UV resin to his eyes to really make him shine. So with my Lego man finished, I need something for him to stand on, but I really wanted something simple so as to fit with the authentic Lego man theme and not draw attention away from the minifig. In the end, I decided to simply make an appropriately sized Lego block. Now, I'm well aware that I could have gone all out and made something extra fancy, and it wouldn't have been too hard to keep the Lego man as the focus, but I really didn't want to. And in the end, it was easy enough to reframe my laziness as artistic integrity. Hell, I could have made a better Lego block out of foam, but then I would have had to paint it, and this clay is already green. Yeah, I'm that lazy sometimes. At any rate though, my Lego block is done. I'll throw it in the oven, mount my Lego man, and we're on to the Glamour Shots. As always, a huge thank you to the supporters over on Patreon that not only enable these sorts of things, but encourage them. And a very special thank you to my newest patrons, Go to Gray, Jacob Rear, Sir Ashton, Darkspur and Kiwi Kuma, Eva, E.L. Shadzaw, Cheryl, Bagus, Audrey H., Stormy Sky, Sun Young, Langston Ward, and Inuyasha. You are the handcrafted red shirt that helps hide the horrific Lego nipples that is this channel. I hope at some point during this video you blew a little extra air out of your nose and had the slightest inkling of a smile. If you did, then consider subscribing for more underwhelming content, and if you didn't, then leave me a mean comment down below telling me how I can improve as a person. Otherwise, we'll see you next time. Cheers.